This is the solution for the 84SM. The 84SM consists of 8 bands, 4 top crossing bands, and then 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 outside bands. I'll now take the ring apart so you can see what it looks like and identify the bands when they're separated from each other. So basically you're going to have 2 sets of bands that are locked in with each other. You're going to have the 4 outside bands and the 4 top bands. What you want to do, and this is going to be a challenge, is you want to pair up your top bands, because you're going to have 2 top smooth bands and then 2 top dimpled bands. So the easiest way to identify them is to run your finger across the top. The 2 topmost bands are going to be smooth. It's difficult to see in a video, but the 2 bands that cross underneath, when you run your finger across, you're going to feel right here in the middle, there's a little dimple. And what you can do if you're having a hard time solving them, you can tie a little string at the bottom of each of these, because essentially you'll treat these as 1 band each. Now I'm going to identify the 4 outside bands. It's pretty easy because you're going to have 2 that point into one direction and 2 that point the opposite direction. So you can see there. Right now they're pointing towards each other. For this step though, in order to solve the puzzle, you need them to be pointing away from each other. So I'm going to take the 2 bands that are in my right hand and I'm going to let them drop and bring them all the way around to the other side. So now what happens is they get into what I like to call the figure of a diamond. So you can see you've got sort of a diamond shape here. So now you know you've got it in the right position. You also know you have it in the right position because you've got the 2 small bands on the inside and then the 2 wider bands on the outside. So for this step, you want to make sure you take these 4 bands and you drop them to the same side because you're going to work with the top bands. If you drop them to opposite sides, they're not going to be in the correct position for the next step. So holding on to the 4 top bands, I let these 4 outside bands drop. I'm always going to work with the ring face down because gravity is going to hold these rings in the position that I need them in. I always like to work with the dimpled bands in my right hand because those are the bands that do the work. The top 2 smooth bands, they pretty much are going to stay stationary. They don't do any work. Again, I put them so they're face down. Dimpled bands, I can feel that dimple, are in my right hand. Turn it face down. Take these 2 bands. They're going to hold those 4 bands. Turn it clockwise. And they're going to drop right down into the space they need to be in. So what happens is they create the shape of a figure 8. And it's a real nice figure 8 because both of these holes are the same size. What can happen is you can have these bands on the wrong side and they'll try to do this step, okay, getting them, cradling them, turning them into a figure 8, and it just doesn't quite work even though it's got a figure 8. This, you can see this hole is smaller than this one, so you know these 2 bands, the dimpled bands, are on the wrong side. So again, I'm just going to take them, turn it all the way around, and now I've got them in the right position. What I'm doing here by jiggling these bands is I want to make sure that all of these outside bands are face down, because that way it makes it easier to do the next step. So again, just kind of jiggle it a little bit. So I take the dimpled bands, kind of hold on to those 4 outside bands. You can see how it's holding it. Turn it clockwise. And I let them sit into place. Now this is where if I had tied the 2 rings together it would be really easy. Because what can happen is they can kind of get twisted to each other. But you see I just kind of wiggled them a little bit, jiggle it, and they got into the right position. And then see, got it into a nice figure 8. Now the challenge you have with this ring is for the next step you need to identify the outermost band. The best way to do that is really just by looking at it. What you can see is usually when I solve this ring, the outermost band ends up being this right band. I don't know why, but that's always how it happens. But just in case it doesn't, you've kind of got to look at the angles a little bit, kind of got to feel it a little bit. There may be some trial and error here, and so you may have to, put one band back and try the other side. But this is going to be the outermost band. Going to turn it so that it's face down. And then I want to make sure this band is really loose. It's got to be loose from all the other ones because it's got to be on top of the other ones. Turn it into the figure 8. And then like a hinge on a door, I'm going to close my door. See, I also know when I did that step that this was the outermost band because see how nice and smooth that is, how it fits so nicely against it. Had I started with the other band, you would have noticed a gap in there. So now I'm going to take this whole ring, I'm going to turn it around, and I'm going to get this outside band. And again, I want to make sure it's really nice and loose in there. And I'm going to turn it into the figure 8 and just kind of close my door. Take the whole ring, turn it around, get this band nice and loose, turn it into the figure 8, and fold it down. Again, turn the whole ring around. Take the last band. You may have to let these bands get a little bit loose just because this space is really tight. So you can see I've kind of got it loose. Turn it, and then fold it down. And there you have the 84 SM.